My daughter Lena's two favorite books are Ways to Make Sunshine and Ways to Grow Love by Renee Watson. The main character in these books is a young girl named Ryan Hart. And her parents named her Ryan because it means king, a leader. And her parents often remind her, especially when she's making unwise choices or navigating grade school friendships, they remind her, be who we've called you to be who we've named you to be the leader that we've named you to be. I hear echoes of the wise words of Ryan Hart's parents in James 3, 1-12. It's a sermon in and of itself about the potential for words and the power that they have to be like deadly poison or to be like life-giving fresh water. And James is urging the church to be who God has called you to be people whose words are a blessing. When people think of the book of James, most often two things come to mind. The first is faith without works is dead, from James 2:17, meaning if our faith in God is merely mental or verbal assent and is not lived out in tangible actions, then we've got it wrong. The second thing that often comes to mind with the book of James is the Protestant reformer Martin Luther and his dislike of this little book. He said, St. James' epistle is really an epistle of straw compared to these others, for it has nothing of the nature of the gospel about it. When we think of the book of James, controlling our speech should be at the top of the list. James has a lot to say about what we say. Early in his letter, he writes, "Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger." And he goes on and writes, "If any think they are religious, but do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless." And in chapter 4, he urges, do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. I suppose we could sum up James's teaching on speech in 3 words. Watch your mouth. I can't think of a better time to hear these words and to put them into practice. The federal election is just over a week away. Be sure to vote. And this election campaign has, of course, been filled with election promises and anger, protests, gravel, eggs, spit, allegations, and lots of words that are not suitable for young ears. Schools are open after months of closure, and we have a lot to say about that. Are schools prepared? Are the safety measures adequate? What should be the top priority for kids? We're just 1 week away, or about a week away, from vaccine passports coming into effect in Ontario. And there are a lot of words that have been spoken about that too. Our temptation is to use this passage as an assessment of others rather than a self-assessment. We want to fill in the blank with the political leader or public figure we are most displeased with, or the most infuriating person we follow on social media, and we want to point and shout, their words are like deadly poison. And yes, their words may very well be like deadly poison. But if this passage causes us to turn our full attention to the words of others and neglect what comes out of our own mouths, then we have missed the point. And let's be sure to include not only what comes out of our mouths, but the words and memes and images that we type and text and share. It can be easy to think that it's what we do that matters and not what we say. But as we see in the book of James, faith without works is dead, and the tongue is a fire. No one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. Speaking is an outward expression of our faith. Our words matter. They can be just as destructive as deadly poison, or as life-giving and restorative as fresh water. I want to turn our attention to 3 words: interior, intentional, and input. In order to watch our mouth, we need to look at our interior. Of course, it would be so much easier if we didn't do this. It's hard work. But what comes out of our mouth is a reflection of what's inside our hearts. And when I say we need to look at our interior, I mean things like this: honestly acknowledging our reality, our pain, our fear, instead of avoiding it or numbing it. Seeking professional help for hardship or trauma that we have experienced. Doing the hard work of knowing ourselves better. Cutting out the noise we use to distract ourselves. Asking ourselves questions like, who do I hurt the most with my words? Who am I most likely to speak the harshest to? When am I most likely to be arrogant with my words? In what settings am I most careless with my words? I recently heard it said, people who do not transform their pain will transmit it. This is why we need to look at our interior. In his memoir, Heavy, Kiese Layman writes about his experience as a Black man growing up in Jackson, Mississippi. He shares about his complicated relationship with his mother and the love they had for each other and the tremendous pain that they caused each other. They spent much of their life being dishonest with one another. But in one of their more honest conversations, Kiese says to his mom, "We all broken. Some broken folk do whatever they can not to break other folk. If we're gone be broken, I wonder if we can be those kind of broken folk from now on. I think it's possible to be broken and ask for help without breaking other people." What interior work do you need to do so that your words are not laced with poison? This is a question that we need to be brave enough to ask ourselves over and over again. If we want to watch our mouth, we also need to be intentional. Some of us would love to see this passage from James as permission to be silent. Sometimes it's easier to say nothing. It's certainly much less vulnerable. Sometimes we have no clue how to respond to the words of others, or we're afraid to speak up because we feel like what we say has to be perfect, or we're cynical and we don't think that using our words for good will do any good or make any kind of difference. Personally, I wish this passage just gave us permission to be silent. It would be so much easier. It's one thing to refrain from saying something hurtful or refrain from gossiping. It's another thing to intentionally offer words of encouragement, intentionally speak hopeful words to someone, or go out of our way to wish someone well, or to pray with or for someone, or speak the truth in love. It's easier to be quiet than it is to calmly say with intention, I don't see it that way. If we want to watch our mouth, we also need to be mindful of our input. What are we filling our minds with? What we fill our minds with will ultimately impact our speech. And I want to give us some homework for the week. I want to encourage you to choose a Bible verse or prayer or song lyrics or something that provides you with life-giving words that can act as an anchor for you and encourage you in your speech. Memorize these words or put them somewhere where you'll see them often. I continue to be very concerned about COVID misinformation. I'm concerned about continued misinformation about vaccines. I find the misinformation around ways of treating COVID to be alarming. This has been on my mind a lot lately, and I find that my internal dialogue, which is also another important part of our speech, I find that my internal dialogue is bubbling up with anxiety when I think about this. And so I have went ahead and done my homework for the week. And I have been using a prayer from the Book of Common Prayer as my anchor and as a reminder not to rely on my own strength. This is a prayer I have been praying. Grant me, O Lord, to trust in you with all my heart. For as you always resist the proud who confide in their own strength, so you never forsake those who make their boast of your mercy. What words do you need to input into your mind and heart to act as an anchor for you? I don't offer these words interior, intentional, and input as superficial suggestions. It's not as if we simply need to read a self-help book so that we can know ourselves better, walk around smiling and saying, God bless you, and memorize a Bible verse and call it good. We need to pay attention to our interior. We need to be intentional with our words, and we need to be mindful of our input. We need to do all of these things, and it still is not going to be easy. We are in extremely challenging times, and we are swimming in a sea of poisonous words. These words from James have the potential to call us to our senses so that we can be who God has called us to be. We can be children of God who speak with grace, who offer words of compassion, who say, I don't see it that way, instead of offering condescending words. People who pray for the well-being of others, people who speak the truth with love and humility, people who say, I don't know, people who ask for forgiveness when we say harmful things, people who admit that we don't get it right with our words, people who use our mouths to say, I'm sorry. Let's be who God has called us to be, acknowledging that this is hard and we will fail if we try to rely on our own strength.